You're listening to Through Help and Back. Through Help and Back is a podcast focused on mental health, addiction, treatment, recovery, and all things related to personal improvement and wellness. Don't worry, we're not here to talk about problems without solutions, and we're definitely not here to talk about struggles without success. So come with your problems, leave with our solutions. Welcome back, everybody, to yet another episode of Through Help and Back. As always, very happy to see you here. Very happy that you're spending some of your time with us. We are filming this on July 14th, and very excited today because we are going to be very much out of my comfort zone for this episode. I'm going to tell you right off the bat. In the therapeutic world, in the human world, people have a variety of skill sets and disciplines and techniques and approaches to healing and care. And one of those is using art, using creative mediums, using art therapy to help clients heal, to help clients express and do the work that they need to do. And that is something that has never been in my toolbox, either personally or professionally. So I'm very excited for our guest today. I'm very excited to learn and to bring that knowledge to you guys as well. So Lesley Andrew is joining us today. She is an artist first. She is an art therapist for over 10 years. Somebody who specializes in working with all ages, but especially children, working in school settings, working in hospital settings. So very excited to meet her and learn more about her work. So welcome, Lesley. So glad to have you.
Hello. Thanks for having me here. That was a lovely welcome. Thank you.
I appreciate that. I never know, when it comes to artists, everybody wants to kind of present and represent a different aspect of that. So I'm blown away by your work. I found you on Instagram and learned a lot about what you're doing. So I hope that was an acceptable introduction to what I'm sure is going to be a great conversation. So right off the bat, where in the world are you? You have a lovely accent. So where is this from?
I'm in the UK. I'm in Leeds, which is in Yorkshire, which is in sort of north part of England. Yeah, I've lived there most of my life, apart from sort of chunks of time where I've moved around. So I've kept coming back to Leeds.
We always end up back home in one way or another, don't we? So yeah, and I think for Americans, that's one of the places of the world that we tend to envision and romanticize, and it's on the bucket list and a place that we want to visit and go see. So, is living there all that it's portrayed in movies and TVs is as lovely as it seems?
I think there's like different perceptions of everywhere, isn't there? And I think in TV, I live round the corner from where the TV show Emmerdale is filmed, so like the soap opera Emmerdale.
Nice.
The pub Emmerdale, like the Woolpack pub, is walking distance from me.
Oh, nice.
And they changed where they film it now, but traditionally that's where they did all the filming.
Well, that's a lot better than what I've got. Where I'm at in New England, I'm right down the road from where they filmed the last episode of Dexter. So they're filming about serial killers where I live, and you're getting a much better concept where you are. So
yeah, well, I don't know. I mean, I've not watched Emmerdale much, but there's quite hard hitting things in the soaps these days, isn't there?
I'm sure. So to try to get a little bit more on topic, tell me a little bit about kind of, growing up, personally as an artist. I mean, what is it? Is it the natural ability of being an artist? I mean, what drew you into the art world and art therapy and specifically?
It's interesting, that kind of idea of ability versus interest. And actually, as far as I remember, I've always been interested in making things, making pictures, doing collages. If there'd be a TV program on and I'd be watching the telly, and a lot of kids would just watch it, and I'd be needing to make the puppet or make the thing. And I would be very hands-on, and there's photographs of me being little, building things out of blocks. And I remember making a picture of a train that when I was 5. And it was in the competition, and I was just really, really pleased with that. And I can't remember thinking, oh my gosh, I'm really good at art, but I always found it enjoyable. And actually, there's something really interesting about like young children, like will play and will create, and they don't have that kind of limitation of, does this look good? They'll just make it. And actually, so I've continued to make art and studied art at school, went on to college, went on to university. I was doing textiles at uni. So actually a lot more of the sort of stitching and hands-on things. and then decided to go into teaching. And partly the reason for that was that I loved art so much that I wanted to share that with other people, and I wanted to help people to be able to access that and access those skills. And there were quite a lot of skills that I didn't naturally use myself in that textiles sort of platform. I would sort of improve on my own skills in that time. And I remember kind of feeling in like a lot of people have a hard time with art education in school. They kind of feel quite criticised and quite judged on their abilities. And I wanted to be an art teacher that could really encourage people's different styles of art and encourage different ways of working and find different tools for people to use to be able to manage that, rather than feeling that they're under pressure to make something that's perfect.
Yeah, because my first thought when you said that about being good at art, it was one of those questions that always pops up. But what can anybody really be good at art? And then you immediately said, "Well, I enjoyed it," right? So it feels like it's like a highly personal experience, because for somebody with no background and somebody with not a lot of knowledge in that. You go to art galleries and you go to things and things are put up on the wall as these like wonderful examples of art. This is good art. And as a layperson, you kind of look at it and you're like, that's just some paint thrown on a canvas. Like, how is that good? And then you see something else and you're blown away. You're like, oh my gosh, this is the most amazing art I've ever seen. So I don't know. I feel when I look at that it's hard to be good or bad at art, because it's more about expressing, getting the inside out and sharing that with the world. Do you feel the same, or are there like technical aspects? Like, do you have an opinion on good versus like bad art? Because I wonder why we feel that pressure.
I think that, yeah, there's definitely a bit of a Western bias as to what good art is. And if you kind of think sort of historically as to like think of different styles of art, and I hear a lot of people questioning art. There's a lot of those dynamics of questioning, is that really art? Because that's just a splodge, and they add the just to a lot of things.
Yes.
Seeing something can feel really out of reach, and there's those sort of polarities of, oh, that's not really very good art. Oh, even my dog could do that. And that there's a humour and there's sort of a bit of banter about it, versus, oh my gosh, like Da Vinci's things are just so amazing, and it's unrealistic to be able to do that. But in terms of being able to build those skills, like anything, if you've got an interest in it, there are ways of building those skills and practicing. And when I was at school, I felt that I wasn't very good at art. I was very creative and had lots and lots of ideas, but I would often compare myself to other people in the class who had really good technical ability. They would draw something to look identical to it. What I've learned more from that is that I wasn't really excited to draw something that looked exactly like that. I would prefer to do something more out the box and a bit more kind of personal.
I mean, and that kind of gets into the world of I don't want to diagnose, but sort of like, self-esteem and anxiety. I wonder what that's like to have an interest like that and to be doing the constant comparison game. I mean, did that stifle your artistic ability? Did that hurt you personally to have those thoughts? And how did you kind of push through that and keep working?
I think, I think it's a good question with that, because I think that's where, at the time when I was at school, the world was very different. There was the idea of going away and being an artist it didn't seem to be on my radar. Like, there was that perception that you couldn't just be an artist unless you were sort of top of the shop sort of thing. And actually, because I still continued unconditionally to have that interest in art, I went into the teaching part of it. And I remember on the teacher training, being told, you go into a career because there's something that you want to have, the things around you. If there's objects and items around you, and you go into a career because you always want to have those things around you. And if you can't imagine not having art materials around you, then that's you being an artist. But nowadays, I see myself that I look back at my life and I feel that I've been an artist all my life. But there's something about the labeling of it and the judgment of it. And actually, I needed to be an artist in order to be an art teacher and in order to be an art therapist now. And they all interact with each other. And being an art therapist makes me a better artist, actually. Yeah, it makes me able to express more of me.
It's so strange, that concept that you just described, because even outside of art, I think about the Steve Jobs story where he talks about you can never understand why you're living your life the way that you are. But when you look backwards, all the pieces fit almost perfectly, right? And so in his world, he was computer programming, but he had taken a calligraphy class when he was dropping out of school because he couldn't leave campus. And because of that, it informed a lot of the choices around Microsoft Word and the fonts and things like that. And so he's like, well, looking backwards, that was the perfect thing for me to do. But at the time, I had no idea it was going to work that way. And it's so interesting to hear that show up in your life, because I think it shows up in everybody's life to a certain degree of, oh, well, that's why I went through that, because now it's paying off in this way, or prepared me for this. So that's very beautiful to think about too, like choosing career because you want it around you. Because I love that it removes that judgment of you don't have to be the best. You just have to want it in your life. Right. And then it's worth pursuing. And then, we'll see how it develops from there. And it seems like that's what's worked out for you.
Yeah, I can't imagine not having art in my life. And I could say if I'm in my 80s or 90s and I can't remember what my interests are, I would be like, put it out there now. If you don't know what I'm interested in, if I'm saying no to art, if you ask me if I want to do some colouring and I say no, ignore me, give me art all the time. And that's something that's going to go on forever.
You're like those videos, those folks that have brain disorders and they put them in front of a piano and they just start playing, right? Like that's going to be you with art.
It could be something as simple as some Play-Doh.
We'll make sure you have some Play-Doh. So let's talk about that transition. So you're teaching art for a long time. Like, when did it spark in you? And when did you start thinking maybe I'd like to get on to the therapeutic side of things?
There was always sort of an interest in how young people were in the pastoral side of teaching. And there was something about kind of using the art, the lessons of the art. There's definitely something about kind of helping people to come up with topics like identity or certain kind of themes that would about social justice and things like that. And a lot of the young people that had those interests, I could see something beyond that it wasn't just about them making art to pass their exams, but it's about some sort of an expression. And what I found as a form tutor is that you're getting to know people more about how they are, and I cared more about how they were rather than about what grades they got. And the number of times, Jason, I would say to a sixth former about, oh, you do art and psychology, how about doing art therapy? And then some years later, how about I do art therapy? And yeah, it just came together. And I've done things within schools. For a while, I was in charge of PSHE, which stands for sort of personal social health education. And some of that is about sort of mental health and is about that sort of building people's self-esteem and how the social aspects of learning can make a difference. So there's something, I keep doing this with my hands. I'm waving my hands around, keep doing this with my hands. And I think part of that is that kinesthetic nature of it, and being able to bring all of those things together and being able to, I tend to find that things come in loops. So I'm in the middle of something and then it clicks and it connects with another experience and go, like you said with the Steve Jobs thing, that's why we needed to do that, because that links back to that other idea. So,
which is interesting because some of your movements are loops. As you're describing. Yeah. So you're kind of keeping the tape rolling for those people old enough to know what tape is. Yeah. So is that it? I mean, it's interesting. So culturally, I'm thinking about schools over there because a lot of your work is in schools. Have they embraced, artistry and artwork? Is that a normal part of the curriculum, and there's space made for that in the schools? Because, here in America, I mean, there are certainly schools that allow for that, but it's not guaranteed, right? And every now and then you may see an art room and it's like old canvases and nobody ever goes in there, or they may take a kid and say have an art class. But do you find that over where you're from, it's more part of the regular curriculum and people embrace that as a valuable resource?
It's definitely part of the curriculum, and people do have access to it. However, it's not one of the core subjects, so it's something that people would opt to do as they get older,
Yeah.
or then not do. And sometimes, depending on the school, they might have a rotation of art, music, and drama, so they might sort of miss that. And at the moment, I'm setting up like when to go into schools, what times to go into schools for September, and a lot of the conversation is about avoiding the same subjects all the time.
Yeah.
And I was talking to somebody the other day about how often art is a subject that gets missed when there's a visitor, and or PE as well is a similar sort of thing where they miss that. And actually, if I were to go into a school and that young person missed a subject that they really, really liked, I wouldn't be doing my job as a therapist, because it would be sort of detrimental to their mental health that you're going to go along and talk about your emotions. Well, actually, I'm really annoyed that I'm having to come here because I'm missing my lesson that I like.
Right.
Yeah. But I think the idea of creativity across the curriculum is much bigger now. That not just being about art and sort of visual and the making things, but about problem solving and about working through things, like combining technology and growth mindset as well fits in with that.
Yeah, and I think we need that, though. I mean, we talk about that over here in the States too, a lot about losing PE. Those what you're talking about as an elective, like maybe kids can take art, but they can take choir, or they can take something else or another class to kind of substitute for it. And I know when I was growing up, like I would have avoided art and did avoid art. And I wonder what I've lost there. You know what I mean? Because boys, right, are not so great at expression that way. It's more physical expression and not so much the artistry. Showing your feelings, expressing your feelings gets certain labels, and people are reluctant to do it. And there's a vulnerability to that. So I don't know. I wonder if we wouldn't be better off. At least people getting a crack at it, right? Like getting an opportunity to have that experience. So they're not sitting there in their 40s like me going like, I've got no art ability. I've never done it. I don't even know how to connect to that world. You know what I mean? I just worry what we're losing there in terms of opportunity.
It's tricky, isn't it? Because actually, when you're at that age where you're choosing options, you do choose something that, and then you're pretty much set for life. But who says? Who says you're set for life? Why can't you bring some art back into your life, like later, like down the line? But I think there's something about, for me, there's something that comes up with as I get older. There's certain things in my life that stay the same, and there's certain interests that change. And actually having that thread of certainty is really helpful for my self-esteem. It's really helpful for that. Whereas having that variety is also really helpful too. So, and one of the things that I've been doing recently this year are some sort of monthly workshops with adults with the focus on creativity and talking about different topics while they make art, and or while they do whatever they're doing creatively. And a lot of people have come onto the thing saying, you know what, I don't do art. Art's not my thing. I never do art. And then after a while, they'll sort of they'll share a picture with me saying, I've just bought some pencil crayons, I've got some pastels. And it just makes my heart kind of beat, because I'm just, somebody that's maybe done a lot of photography but not seen that as art, not seen that as being creative, but then kind of gone, oh, actually, you've really inspired me to go and make some more art. And it's okay to be decades after school and go, I'm just going to kind of have a play with the art materials. I don't need to make it look like something. But then when they've had that sort of experiment, they'll look at it and they'll feel really proud of what they've done. And they feel maybe a sense of sort of presence with it.
Like maybe there's more to me than I thought, or maybe it implies that there's other things that I could have interest in that I haven't discovered yet. And it keeps the world big. I think one of the things as you get older that's you have to be careful of is your world can get smaller and smaller, right? So like through physical abilities, you can't really go like you used to go. Maybe vision becomes an issue or whatever, or just habits and routines. You eat at the same places, you watch the same shows, you talk to the same people. And I think it's important that we keep expanding our world instead of allowing it to kind of like shrink. I mean, there's comfort in repetition, but I don't know. I don't think our brains and minds are stimulated in a small world. I think they're stimulated and become open to that growth mindset, like you said, when we're exploring, when we're, experimenting and trying new things. So I think it's important to remain a beginner in some way, right? There's a lot of things that I've done for 10, 15 years that I feel like I'm an expert at. Pick up something brand new and become a beginner again, right? And see how that feels. And what's nice about it is later in life, there's no pressure because you don't have to make it your career. You can just play. And it's very important that we keep playing. So with art therapy versus art teaching, so tell me a little bit about kind of your mindset and how it's changed when you're in artist mode versus art therapist mode, or when you're like in teacher mode. Like what did adding that art therapy piece, do for you, and how do you change in each of those roles?
I think there's something about not just it being me, but who I'm with at the time. And so, like the client, and something about responding to the client and what the intention is. So, as a straightforward example, when I was art teaching, I'd have maybe a class of 30 in front of me, and we'd have a certain curriculum to follow. And that would, there'd be individual like things with that. There'd be certain times when people would experiment, but it would be quite contained within that sort of parameter. Whereas the way that I see art therapy is you've got the art psychotherapy, art therapy dynamic as well. And I see the art as a tool for communication. And it's you've got twofold thing. You've got the actual physical movement and use of the materials, which can itself be therapeutic, and depending on what you use can be either calming or it can boost your mood. But then there's also the symbols around it and the metaphors around it and the dynamics between the conversations that happen between that, and that as an intention of building kind of meaning and gaining new insights, being able to think differently about experiences, thinking like processing trauma is a big one as well. Sometimes that's seen as being really quite overwhelming, that someone, oh, well, what do you mean? Like, okay, well, I don't want to talk about my stuff, but I don't want to make art about it either. Oh, okay. Well, it's not so much about making a diagram of the things that happened, but more about building that rapport and testing out the unfamiliar materials. What is it possible to do this and still feel safe? Is it, if I make a picture and it looks ugly, will that person still like me? Will they tolerate that? So there's loads of things that when I was a teacher, I used to think more about the images from a technical perspective, and the interactions I had with people were about the artwork from a technical thing, or there'd be a lot of challenges in behaviour that I'd work with. Whereas from a therapy point of view, there's so much that goes on in terms of emotions, and that actually sometimes I'm experiencing some of the emotions that they're experiencing. Sometimes it's in the art, sometimes it's elsewhere. And I'd say my own art's a bit of a mixture of the two.
Well, that's funny. That was going to be my next question. Has that influenced your work and affected you, having had those experiences of therapy? Does it change your art or how you feel about the art that you're producing as well?
I think there's another stance of intention with that. So sometimes I'll make art that is a response image. Say, for instance, if I've had an art therapy session, or if I'm in my art therapy supervision, which is really essential for like safe clinical work, I'll make an image with the intention of, with that client in mind, or with a particular theme in mind that relates with that, and that's about those interactions. And it could be about some of my own personal experiences that have kind of come to the surface because of that session, or it could be about something that's going on for that young person. Whereas it feels like there's an element of self-care, I suppose, like when I'm making my own artwork, and an element of communicating something different. It feels much more about, okay, I'm going, and I have a little studio at home, so I go upstairs to the studio. And whereas if I make art that's art therapy related, I tend to make it downstairs. But I'll go upstairs to the studio, and I'll stick on some music or a podcast or something, and just start painting. And sometimes I could make something and it lasts 10 minutes and it's done. Other times it could be months and months and months making something.
Before we go on, I want to say a few words about Anew Behavioral Health. Anew Behavioral Health is an outpatient provider of mental health and substance abuse services in Ohio and New Hampshire. That means that Anew can successfully treat mental health and substance abuse issues or dual diagnosis if you're struggling with both. Their integrated approach allows for them to successfully address issues related to anxiety, depression, addiction, trauma, and really anything that stands between your life and the life you could be living. You really cannot bring them an issue that they have not successfully treated. They have also solved one of the biggest problems for people seeking help. They have a dedicated team waiting to hear from you at helpnow@anewbh.com. If you contact them today, within 24 hours, you will have heard back from, wait for this, a real live person, and will also have your first appointment scheduled at that time. So how do you contact them? Well, if you're in Ohio or New Hampshire, you're probably close to one of their local locations. You're welcome to go in. If not, you can always reach them online at anewbh.com. And if you're interested in services for you or loved one, use that address, helpnow@anewbh.com. It's interesting because we've talked with other therapists, and I've been through this myself. Being a therapist just in general is a very difficult job. It physically is not too troubling, but emotionally, psychologically, it can be very exhausting, And we always talk about self-care. We always talk about ways to prevent burnout. We talk about ways of keeping ourselves healthy when we're dealing with everybody else's dysfunction and troubles. I mean, it's, if you think about a standard day, 6 to 8 times a day, having hour-long sessions, and we're not always in there talking about happy things, right? And it's hard to do that times 5, that gets you a week, times 52, that gets you a year. That's a lot of dysfunction and negativity and just tough things to deal with. And so your art almost seems like it now has dual purpose. It's your own expression, but it's also a cathartic kind of processing mechanism to kind of not purge, like get rid of, but to just kind of like process what you may be feeling about a particular case or a particular client. So I'm like imagining like, I don't know, I'm imagining like a certain theme and tone to your personal art, but maybe a totally different theme as you're getting that stuff out and deciding how you feel about that when it comes to a particular client. Yeah.
It can be, there's ways of thinking about art therapy as a diagrammatic image. This is part of the theory, which is very much like kind of like, for an example will be a map, drawing out a map or drawing out a picture of something or somebody, and then an embodied image, which can be a bit more cathartic, and that's an art image that really holds on to those emotions and the maybe ideas around it. And a lot, when I'm making, I toy between the two, but when I'm really making art for myself, it becomes more of an embodied thing. Yeah, there's a bit of an alignment with that. So I could start off with something really kind of spontaneous, expressive, and then slow down and really align with myself, and like making art from the heart, I would say as well. Whereas maybe the reaction initially is from the head, and then when I settle into it, it becomes more from the heart, and which fits so well with like some of the things about like the body and emotions, and just how we kind of connect with the art, and how we maybe make something that when you know that it's a piece that's ready and finished. So I could look at a piece of art and sort of go, oh, I don't really like that. Oh, I like that. Oh no, I don't like that. Oh no, I don't like that. And then when it's done, it's like, yeah, hell yes, spot on. And there's a certainty about that, and that doesn't happen when I'm not aligned with myself and when I've not managed my own stuff. So the first part can happen as an expression, and then the completion of it as an art product happens when I'm aligned with it. Yeah.
I can feel a percentage of what you're feeling when it all clicks into place and you're fully aligned. You can see you're very passionate about it and you get excited. Like, yes, this is when it's finally flowing from source, right? Like now I've got a clear line to what I'm trying to express versus a muddled kind of image where it's like, what else, where's this coming from? And maybe it's leftover feelings towards a client or towards a situation and you haven't cleared that yet. So I'm going to ask you a question. I know the answer to this question, but I'm going to ask it anyway because, I was asked this in a therapeutic setting by a potential client because there's skepticism around art, right? Like some parents will send their kids for art therapy and they're like, yeah, they went to the art therapist and they finger painted for 45 minutes. Like, I don't know what they're doing in there, right? So just very kind of like simply, do you believe that art therapy works? And if yes, what is it really good at helping with? Like, what does it work for? Are there particular diagnosis, particular issues? When is art therapy like really effective? If you believe that it works overall,
Absolutely. It would be thrown if I said no.
it'd be a different interview from here on out if you said no.
Just filling time.
Well, and when I say does it work, I mean I guess what people feel is like, is it art therapy or is it just doing art in therapy?
Absolutely. And I think that extra part that you said brings me to, there's loads of things that we can talk about with this, but absolutely. And I think that there's something about the images that are made and the physical opportunity to sit and make art, and something like finger painting can be a way of, your fingers go all the way up to your brain, all the way around, and you're making these sorts of things. We've got this repetition. We've got this kind of experience of using both hands can be really good for trauma, really good for connecting both sides of the brain together, really good for regulating emotions. So with emotional regulation, there's quite a somatic way of using art to regulate. So if somebody's quite heightened emotionally, maybe feeling quite angry or quite kind of anxious, then doing something like, actually that spiral repetition can be really good for that sort of thing. Or certain materials can be really calming, whereas other materials can be quite heightening. And I often hear that from parents saying, all they did was colour in, or all they did was do some painting, and what are they actually doing? And I think part of that is that they want to be part of that conversation. And sometimes I do dyadic art therapy where it's the parent and child together, and what that's more about, what that tends to be about, is not about the individuals but about the relationship. And far often, a parent will send their child to therapy thinking that the problem is what's going on for them, but actually it's bigger than that. And actually, if we can heal the relationship, or it might not be, it's not necessarily broken. We're not necessarily working with broken people, we're working with quite complex dynamics maybe. So using some art and like having a little giggle about the fact that, I have not used crayons since I was 5 or something, and you can't. Actually, the crayons are quite underrated as a medium, but this kind of thing of, there's a mystery of it, and there's a lot of literature about the sensory nature of art therapy and using art to work with trauma. And there's loads of literature about family therapy and art therapy and all that. But I think typically art therapists are quite humble about, and they're quite, we'd respond to confidentiality. So we wouldn't be sharing all of the insights that we have about what the finger painting meant.
Yes.
And I think because of that, it leaves people feeling uncertain, and it leaves a mystery as to, well, we don't know why it worked, but somehow my son or my daughter appears to be more calm and more confident when they were. And sometimes there is some value in art therapists needing to promote it more and big it up more, and really be able to say, actually, what happened there when they tested out that new material, and somebody might be quite nervous about making a mess, so they tested out that material, allowed that ink to drip, was that it got them out their comfort zone. And actually, if they can do that with art, perhaps they might go to the shop, which they were also anxious about, or they might do something else that they've been avoiding.
I agree. And I listen, we've talked about it on this show. I think therapy as a whole is an art. I don't think it's a science. I think that we are sort of beholden to this medical model. And I think people have conceptions about what it should look like and what it should do. And what they want to see a brain scan, and they want to see a dark area, and they want to see you do a therapy session where you have them paint, and then they want to have a brain scan afterwards, and they want to see a different line, or they want to see something open up, right? So this indefinite nature, or they want a blood test that shows, or they want a percentage, right? Like 6 art therapy sessions guarantee you're 40% better. And that's not how therapy works. That's not how any of these healing traditions work. And what I've learned on this show, and I think we had a sense of it, was there's a lot of different ways to heal. And just because a PhD student didn't do a study and give you a number behind it doesn't mean that they're not effective, doesn't mean that they don't work for people, right? It's a highly individualized, highly personal process. So they always want to call therapy a soft science, and I think it's a very hard art. I think there's more art there, and it's very difficult to get that, to get the timing right and the touch right, and even your expertise and intuition, when to use this subject matter versus that, when to use crayons versus finger paints and things like that. Like that all comes from watching people heal along the way. So, I think that's a great question. Are there, we all live in servitude to the DSM and the diagnostic nature of disease and things like that. You've mentioned trauma, you've touched on family work. Are there other particular conditions or diagnoses that you think art therapy is particularly helpful for?
Yeah, it can help. I would say it can help with sort of anxiety, depression. We're talking eating disorders, psychosis, sort of those sort of mental health illnesses. It can help with relationship difficulties, thinking about sort of people experiencing difficulties during the menopause, those sorts of things as well, where there may be loss of identity, feeling a bit stuck, emotional burnout. So many things. And I think part of what the dilemma is often is that people don't fit into that box of, I have anxiety or I have ADHD, and so therefore I could do art therapy, and it doesn't necessarily fit with that. But people sometimes think that they might feel that they've healed and that they're doing really well cognitively, but actually, I don't really feel any emotions. I don't really express any emotions, and I'm really confident. But actually, when they're given an opportunity to do something creatively, that's when they connect with their sort of inner child, or connect with something that actually I am growing through this and working with this. There's so many different things.
Yeah, and you speak of growth, and I think that's important to point out too, because you said, well, on the surface it may seem one way, but internally I'm not really feeling this. I mean, the absence of sickness is not necessarily health, right? Like the absence of symptoms is not necessarily thriving. That health and wellness are its own conversations and its own experiences within the body, and I think there's great potential for to contribute to that. On a personal level, you talked about identity, and you talked about, you've been an artist your whole life. I mean, Have you also felt that benefit? Like, have there been personal challenges or struggles or experiences that you've been able to turn to art, or that art has assisted you with?
I would say that, like, when I was growing up, things were pretty stable, really. But actually, there are some things that actually not so ideal, and yeah, she's got divorced parents, and that at the time felt that it was okay. So when I look back at it, I think, or the judgment of it was that actually everything was really smoothly run. But probably at the time, I was maybe using a lot of tools and using a lot of art to regulate my emotions about what's going on, and carrying on with that. And actually, like, just sort of moving into sort of adulthood, there's been a lot of health, like my own personal health issues as well, where I've been able to use art to sort of process the difficulties of that, and process the sort of limitations that have come with that, and like frustrations and such like.
And then back to that concept of identity, how has art either helped you clarify your sense of self and identity, or helped to develop that sense of self and identity? I mean, has it had a role on that side of the equation as well?
Yeah, because the idea of how defining myself as an artist, that's only really happened in the last sort of 3 years or 4 years maybe. So I've always made art, and it's been a bit of an adjunct to art careers. So I've always made art. And it was when the sort of pandemic hit that I sort of really immersed myself into art. And like times when I've maybe had time away from work, or time where I've maybe been unwell, then I've made art as well. And that identity of, I can't do X, Y, and Z, however, I will do this. And it's that notion of, if you can't, you must, if you must, you will. And art has always been with that. And yeah, that's always been like that role. But there's something about it keeps coming back. And there's this sort of notion of, if it keeps coming back, it must be important. And when it's that important, it becomes part of the identity.
Because I mean, we go way back. We've talked for like 45 minutes now, so we're old friends, and I know you really well. But when I hear your story, I would have thought you would have identified as an artist as a child. You've been doing this forever. It's always been part of what you've been compelled by it. You feel affected by it. You've sought it out. And so it's very interesting to me to hear you say, I only accepted that identity or embraced that identity in the last couple years. What was it? Was it a self-esteem and judgment issue that prevented you? Like, my art's not good enough to say I'm an artist, or what held you back before now?
Yeah, maybe a bit of a self-esteem thing, but I think more of a shoulds, like the shoulds of society, of, and actually, but also at the time when I went in to become a teacher, I was more interested in helping other people through art than I was about making my own art. And I would make examples of art, and it was tricky to be an artist and an art teacher at the same time, because whenever I had an idea, I'd get excited about it and think, oh, I could teach that to year 8. Or there's a sixth former who would really like these photographs that I've got. Like, I can imagine that linking really well to their project about the city or whatever it is. But this idea of having not expressed myself fully throughout my life is what I'm sort of contending with at the moment, with the idea of helping other people to be able to express their true selves, and when they're feeling a bit lost. And I'm at that stage where my hormones are a little bit out of whack, and I like fitting in with some sort of like health things as well. But I tell people to express themselves and encourage them to express their true self. Yet I find that even though I've been making art, and you could see all the art at home and you think that you're making forever, and I still don't feel that I've been truly expressing myself and truly expressing that. So there's something frustrating about that. And I think that on a cognitive level, I've only just really worked that out in these last couple of years, because I've been making art, I've been doing these, maybe there's a sense of minimizing things, like we all do this, and I've had that sort of illuminated to me through personal development work, through kind of using my own art more and all those things. But what I've come to, the link that I've come to making of how I've not been expressing myself comes with my own personal health story. And it feels a bit hard to explain.
It's okay. You're doing great. Yeah.
So around about the time when I finished teaching, I was very anemic, and I developed fibroids in the uterus. Now, a lot of girls and women have trouble with their periods, and they have that kind of, oh my gosh, I don't know who I am or what I am and how I'm going to be identifying, how I'm going to struggle with all of this. But actually, it come in at a time when I developed fibroids, and they are tumours in the uterus. For those that haven't heard of them, it's actually Fibroids Awareness Month.
Okay, all right.
Opportunity to talk about it. And I had quite a lot in my uterus, and it affected my health. And I had what's called a myomectomy about a year later, which is to remove the fibroids. And you keep the uterus, but you remove the fibroids. And one of the things about that is that they've actually grown back. So there's a frustration with that. So post-operation, I was feeling really healthy. I was going and doing lots of exercise, doing lots of marathons and things like that, and doing obstacle races. And this is another one of those, how do you identify it as a runner? Identity. Yeah. And then they grew back. So I'm at the stage where they've grown back, and I'm starting to have some treatment for it, and starting to kind of think about, okay, what's going on for me? What's like, how am I going to be? How am I going to be working with this? And all the way through this, I've turned to art when there's been uncertainty and when there's been that sort of mess. And what I've started to reflect on and read up about is about how, there's an article somewhere, don't quote me on it.
It's all good. Yeah, we're casual.
Or a book somewhere about how fibroids grow when the uterus hasn't produced and grown something themselves. So I don't have children, and I don't think there's not a set kind of cause of fibroids, but this is the theory I'm taking, and this is, or one of them anyway. They grow when you haven't had children, or I haven't chosen to have children, so everyone's story is different. Or when you're maybe not expressing yourself, or the body's going to create something regardless. So if it's not creating one thing, it will create something else. And actually, there's loads of stories about that. But what I was asked recently by another psychotherapist was just, she works with kind of like women who also have difficulties with like their menstrual cycles, and to get aligned with their bodies and aligned with their soul. And she just sort of randomly asked me, why are your ovaries so angry? At first I was just like, oh my gosh, why are you asking me this? Maybe they're cross that they keep asked how I'd like my eggs in the morning or something. But it just made me think about that idea of self-expression and the body holding on to trauma and holding on to feelings if you don't express them. And so actually, I was thinking about that kind of thing of the uterus representing the purpose. These are all societal expectations, aren't they? Like, none of this. You're not necessarily not a successful woman if you haven't had children, blah, 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 blah.
Of course.
In my reflection, I was thinking, maybe the uterus doesn't feel that they have served their purpose. So me as a whole and me connecting mind, like heart and uterus, we've got this thing going on. Having that purpose isn't, for me, it's not having children. For me, it's like we all have a different purpose in life. So for me, it was about creativity and having that kind of, there's a must about, I must help other people to be creative. I must express my own stuff. And what happens with my health stuff almost doesn't matter, but it does matter, but it's not necessarily conditional of this, because that will go one way. But what I do with the rest of my life and the purpose that it holds of helping other people with self-expression and helping people to kind of cathartically release their emotions and all of that, that felt, I needed her to ask me that question to really embody that and to be able to, like, yeah, really, it's felt really powerful. It's not so much about the science of what's going on with my body, but it's about the identity of it and the meaning of it.
That's right. That's right. Well, science can only tell us about the symptoms, right? Okay, so to use your story, like there's a fibroid here, and molecularly, this is why it grew and how it grew, right? But it can't tell us a thing about the core issue that may have opened the door for that to develop, right? We're still all guessing about that. And my suspicion in listening to your story, and we have a big disclaimer at the end of the podcast, this is not medical advice, and these are all personal opinions and stuff like that. So take it with a grain of salt. And coming from somebody without a uterus. So take that, with it as well. But, I would say you have been doing so much for so many other people. You've been helping other people express, and you've been helping other people learn how to express. And I think about going way back to young Lesley in the midst of the divorce. And I could imagine that you may have done what you could to help your mom and done what you could to help your dad. And, it's always this inside out to others. And the one thing that health scares or health issues are really good at is redirecting our attention back to us, right? Like, what's going on with me? Oh my gosh, all this other stuff, all this noise around me, all of a sudden maybe doesn't matter because I've got something that I've got to tend to right now. And, my sense is that maybe the signal is you've done so much for others and their ability to create and express that maybe now it's time for you to do as much for yourself and help yourself get those messages out and get that expression out and create on your terms, right? Maybe you've done your duty for others and it's time to do a similar duty for yourself. Just a theory, but that's what I think about when I hear your story, So how does somebody, and thank you for sharing that, an amazing personal story. And we'll have to keep swapping theories on this. I'm not your doctor, so I don't know what you're going to do next, but I would guess it has a lot to do with finding avenues and time and attention and love for yourself to be able to make what you need to make. There's things that you need to create that are yet uncreated, and every part of your body, you said it, mind, heart, and uterus is telling you maybe it's time to create that stuff. So I hope you do. For all the rest of us out there, though, that are sort of just playing with these ideas and just getting started, like how do we start, right? So not everybody's going to go become an art therapist, but how do people start incorporating art and expression through art? And how does one begin? I mean, you're way down the path in terms of this. What about the beginner? What are some recommendations for them?
Well, there's lots of things in maybe just doing 5 minutes or 10 minutes every day, doing something that's creative. It could be that there's no need to have like loads and loads and loads of art materials, like just a few things that you can get from the pound shop even, or from sort of other stores can be good.
All right. Well, we're going to wrap up here. But again, Lesley, thank you so much, producer Leo. And before we go, I do want to say I want to give a shout out to our sponsor, Anew Behavioral Health. We do have art therapists that are available for Anew Behavioral Health. So if you're in Ohio or New Hampshire and you're looking to connect with people who can help in that way, obviously, if you're in Lesley's neck of the woods, and you heard she has online tools as well. So please feel free to connect with Lesley. That's a great place to start. But if you're looking for a local option in Ohio, New Hampshire, Anew Behavioral Health has that. You can get with them at anewbh.com. or helpnow@anewbh.com. So final thanks to Leo. Final thanks to Lesley. Appreciate you so much. And a big thank you to you guys for spending some time with us. As I always say, time is your most valuable asset. So thank you for spending some of that with us. I really hope that you got something out of it. Really hope it was worth the time. So until next time, take care of yourself and take care of each other. Thanks so much. Hey guys, although Through Help and Back is an excellent podcast with a lot of great ideas, I do want to let you know that in no way is Through Help and Back expected to be perceived as or relied upon in any way as specific medical advice or mental health advice for you personally. The information provided through Help and Back on our website or our podcast is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment that can be provided by your own providers. Do not use our content in lieu of professional advice given by qualified medical professionals, and do not disregard professional medical advice or delay seeking professional advice because of the information you have read on our website, heard on our podcast, or otherwise received from us. Although we love discussing issues related to healthcare, mental health, and addiction, we are not providing direct healthcare, mental health care, medical, or nutrition therapy services. We're not attempting to diagnose, treat, prevent, or cure in any manner whatsoever any physical or psychological ailment, any mental or emotional issue, disease, or condition. We are not giving you specific medical, psychological, or religious advice whatsoever. Please take care of yourself and take care of others as you always seek the advice of your own medical providers and your own mental health providers regarding any questions or concerns you have about your specific health, or before implementing any recommendations or suggestions from us. These are ideas that have worked for other people. We think it's important to share them. We do not guarantee that they will work for you specifically. Do not stop taking any medications without speaking to your physician, nurse practitioner, physician assistant, mental health provider, or any other healthcare or medical professional. And if you have or suspect that you have a medical or mental health issue, contact your own healthcare provider promptly. Also, one last thing, if you know or suspect that you are currently experiencing a crisis, it is absolutely imperative that you seek the advice of your doctor or other emergency healthcare services prior to ever thinking about using our content. We love the conversations. We're glad you're stopping by. We hope you take a lot from the content. But again, for your specific individual medical situation, please always seek quality personal care from your own providers. Do not let this information or this advice stand on its own. Thanks so much for listening.